Everton Corp stood tall in the heart of the financial district, a towering glass fortress that symbolized power and prestige. Known as one of the most influential corporations in the finance industry, it was a place where only the best and brightest were welcomed. The marble floors gleamed under the golden lights, and the air was thick with the scent of ambition. At first glance, Everton Corp appeared to be the epitome of professionalism and excellence. Employees walked briskly through the halls, dressed in perfectly tailored suits, their eyes fixed on success. Meetings were held in sleek conference rooms, where billion-dollar deals were made with the mere signing of a contract. Everything about the company exuded an air of superiority. But beneath this polished exterior lay an unspoken truth. Everton Corp prided itself on its reputation, yet it harbored an ingrained bias, a system designed to keep certain people at the top while quietly pushing others aside. Promotions were rarely given to those who did not fit the culture. Unwritten rules dictated who would be accepted and who would be rejected before they even had a chance to prove themselves. The Human Resources Department, led by David Thompson, was at the center of this silent gatekeeping. David had been with Everton Corp for over 2 decades, and while he maintained the outward appearance of a professional, his hiring decisions often reflected his personal biases. He valued tradition, and in his eyes, tradition meant maintaining the status quo. Anyone who didn't fit his preconceived notion of what an Everton Corp employee should be was swiftly dismissed, their resumes set aside without a second thought. As far as the world knew, Everton Corp was a beacon of success. But for those who had faced its hidden barriers, it was a fortress built not just on financial acumen, but on carefully maintained exclusion. Sophia Carter had always believed that hard work and perseverance would open doors for her. Ever since she was a child, she had excelled academically, driven by a relentless determination to succeed. She had graduated with honors from one of the country's top business schools, earning an MBA that should have guaranteed her a place in the corporate world. On paper, she was the ideal candidate, highly educated, ambitious, and experienced in financial management. Yet, reality had proven to be far more complicated. Despite her impressive qualifications, Sophia had faced rejection after rejection. Interviews that started with enthusiasm quickly turned cold once she stepped into the room. Recruiters would glance at her resume, acknowledge her achievements, but then shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their polite smiles masked an unspoken hesitation, one she had grown painfully familiar with. She had seen it happen too many times to believe it was a coincidence. Her sharp intellect and extensive experience should have spoken for themselves, but there was always something else at play. Time and again, the opportunities she deserved slipped through her fingers, always going to someone who fit the company culture better. But Sophia was not one to give up. She refused to let the silent prejudices of the corporate world define her worth. Every rejection only strengthened her resolve. She knew that somewhere, there was a place that would recognize her abilities, not just her appearance. And so, when she received an invitation to interview at Everton Corp, one of the most prestigious financial firms in the country, she saw it as another chance, another opportunity to prove herself, another battle to fight. As she prepared for her interview, she reminded herself of one thing: she was more than capable. She had earned her place at the table, and this time she was determined to take it. Sophia Carter took a deep breath as she stepped into the towering glass building of Everton Corporation. The lobby was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors that reflected the bright overhead lights. Around her, employees in sharp suits moved with precision, their conversations filled with financial jargon and quiet urgency. This was the kind of place she had always dreamed of working in, a company where she could finally put her expertise to use. Adjusting the strap of her bag, she walked toward the receptionist with confidence. "Good morning. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. David Thompson," she said with a polite smile. The receptionist barely glanced up before nodding toward the elevator. 7th floor, HR department. Sophia thanked her and made her way up. As the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a stark, modern office space. Glass walls separated different meeting rooms, offering glimpses of executives deep in discussion. The HR department was just ahead, and she could already see a man standing near his desk, flipping through a folder, her resume. David Thompson. He looked up as she approached, and for a brief second, his expression registered surprise. Then, just as quickly, his face returned to a neutral, almost indifferent look. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone void of warmth. "Right this way." He led her into a small conference room, motioning for her to sit. As she settled in, she studied him. He was in his mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and a crisp navy blue suit. Everything about him screamed authority, but there was something else. Something in the way he barely looked at her, the way he hesitated slightly before speaking, as if he had already made a decision about her before she even said a word. David opened her resume and skimmed through it, tapping his fingers on the table. "Impressive credentials," he muttered, though his voice carried no real enthusiasm. "MBA from one of the top schools. Strong experience in financial analysis. But," he set the paper down, finally meeting her gaze. His expression was unreadable, yet Sophia could sense the judgment beneath it. "You don't exactly fit the typical profile of our management team," he said, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. Sophia kept her face neutral, though inside, frustration flared. She had heard this before, phrased differently, masked under corporate politeness, but always with the same meaning. Still, she kept her voice steady. "I believe my qualifications and experience speak for themselves, Mr. Thompson. I'm confident that I can contribute significantly to Everton Corporation." David leaned back, folding his arms. "We'll see," he said, his expression unreadable. Sophia felt the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. This wasn't just a test of her skills, it was something else entirely. And she knew she was going to have to fight for every second of this interview. Sophia adjusted her posture, keeping her hands folded neatly on the table. She had prepared for this interview extensively, anticipating the usual questions about financial strategies, risk management, and corporate efficiency. She knew her expertise was solid. She just had to make sure that David Thompson saw it too. David glanced at her resume again before clearing his throat. "Tell me about a time when you had to handle a high-pressure situation in financial management." Sophia nodded, unfazed by the question. "In my previous role, I was responsible for overseeing a multi-million-dollar merger between two financial institutions. There was a critical moment when discrepancies in the financial reports surfaced just days before finalization. If we hadn't caught them, it could have led to severe regulatory issues." David arched an eyebrow. "And what did you do?" "I immediately led a team to conduct a full audit, working around the clock to identify the inconsistencies. I coordinated with legal advisors and financial analysts to ensure compliance and transparency. In the end, we resolved the issues within 48 hours and successfully completed the merger without legal repercussions." There was a brief silence. Sophia could tell that David wasn't expecting such a decisive answer. "Impressive," he admitted, though his voice was flat. "But working under pressure is one thing. What about leadership? How would you handle a situation where your team disagrees with your decision?" Sophia didn't miss a beat. "Leadership isn't about enforcing authority. It's about building trust. I believe in fostering open communication. If my team disagreed with a decision, I would encourage discussion. If their points were valid, I'd adjust my approach. But if I was confident in my decision, I'd take the time to explain my reasoning, ensuring they understood the bigger picture." David leaned back slightly, his fingers drumming against the table. "And what if your team still resists?" Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Then I would remind them that leadership requires making tough calls. I wouldn't back down from a decision just because it was unpopular. But I would always ensure my decisions were based on logic, data, and the best interests of the company." Another brief pause. David studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He flipped through her resume again, as if looking for anything to challenge her on. "Your academic record is flawless," he said after a moment. "But Everton Corp values more than just intelligence. We need people who can fit into our corporate culture." There it was again, that subtle implication that she didn't belong. Sophia didn't let it shake her. I believe corporate culture is built by the people who work in it. If Everton Corp values excellence, innovation, and results, then I fit perfectly. David's lips pressed into a thin line. It was clear that no matter how well she answered, he had already made up his mind about her. But Sophia wasn't done yet. She was determined to show him exactly why she deserved this job. David closed the folder containing Sophia's resume and leaned forward slightly, clasping his hands together. His expression was composed, yet there was an underlying sharpness in his gaze. "You certainly have an impressive academic background," he said, tilting his head. "But tell me, Miss Carter, how do you see yourself fitting into a company like Everton Corp?" Sophia kept her posture firm. "Everton Corp is one of the top financial firms in the country. I see myself contributing by leveraging my expertise in risk assessment and investment strategies to drive sustainable growth." David gave a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a well-rehearsed answer, but what I mean is, do you think you fit our culture? Everton Corp operates on a very particular set of standards." Sophia understood exactly what he was implying. She had heard this kind of question before, hidden behind corporate politeness. It wasn't about her qualifications, it was about whether she looked like the kind of person who belonged here. "I believe culture is built on the values a company upholds," she replied smoothly. "If Everton Corp values integrity, innovation, and performance, then I fit in perfectly." David nodded slowly, but there was something calculating in his demeanor. Interesting perspective. He glanced at his watch before shifting his approach. "In your previous role, were you ever asked to adapt your style to better integrate with a predominantly, shall we say, established team?" Sophia's fingers twitched slightly, but she kept her face neutral. "If you're asking whether I've had to prove myself in environments where I was the minority, then yes. I've worked in teams where I was different from the rest. But my results spoke for themselves, and my leadership was respected because of my performance." David smirked slightly, tapping a pen against the table. "Confidence is important, Miss Carter, but so is knowing how to navigate relationships. You see, at Everton Corp, we have a certain way of doing things. Sometimes, being too assertive can make integration difficult." Sophia clenched her jaw but refused to let her frustration show. "I believe strong leadership requires assertiveness, Mr. Thompson. If a company values innovation and change, it should welcome people who challenge outdated norms." A flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, passed over David's face, but he quickly masked it. "I see," he murmured before glancing at the glass-walled hallway outside the interview room. Sophia noticed it then. A few employees were passing by, but unlike in other offices where casual glances were the norm, these people were subtly stealing looks at her. Some whispered as they walked, their expressions neutral but watchful. She wasn't just another candidate being interviewed. She was being observed. Was it because she was a highly qualified applicant? Or was it because she was someone who didn't match their expectations? David exhaled slightly, returning his attention to her. "I appreciate your ambition, Miss Carter, but I have to ask, how do you handle rejection?" Sophia narrowed her eyes slightly, reading between the lines. "I handle rejection the way any professional does. I take feedback, I learn from it, and I improve. But I don't accept rejection when it's based on anything other than performance." David gave another unreadable smile. "That's an interesting perspective," he said vaguely, tapping his pen one last time before setting it down. Sophia could already feel the shift in the room. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a dismissal veiled in politeness, and she was not going to let it slide so easily. Sophia took a slow, measured breath, willing herself to stay composed. She had been in situations like this before, where her qualifications were scrutinized more than necessary, where her presence seemed to make people uncomfortable for reasons that had nothing to do with her skills. But she had never backed down before, and she wasn't about to start now. She met David's gaze directly, her voice steady. "Mr. Thompson, I understand that every company has its own culture, but I also believe that success is driven by results, not by superficial expectations. If Everton Corp values excellence, then my experience, my education, and my track record should be the only things that matter. David tilted his head slightly, his fingers drumming against the table in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Of course, Miss Carter, but fitting into a team is just as important as individual performance. Our employees need to have a natural synergy, an ability to blend seamlessly. Sophia didn't miss the implication. She leaned forward slightly. Are you saying that my background would make it difficult for me to integrate here? David gave a practiced smile, the kind that corporate executives used when they wanted to appear neutral but condescending at the same time. I'm saying that chemistry matters. We have a very particular work environment. Employees thrive when they align with the team's dynamics. Sophia refused to let him shift the narrative. And those dynamics should be based on skills, professionalism, and contributions, not on whether someone looks or sounds a certain way. A flicker of something, perhaps irritation, crossed David's face, but he masked it quickly. No one is saying otherwise, Miss Carter. But let's be honest. People work best with others who share similar backgrounds and experiences. Sophia's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her composure. That's a convenient way of justifying exclusion, Mr. Thompson. Innovation doesn't come from hiring the same kinds of people. It comes from diversity of thought, perspective, and experience. Studies have shown that diverse teams perform better, make better financial decisions, and drive higher profits. Surely, Everton Corp values that. David leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together. Of course, we value diversity, but it has to be the right kind of diversity. It has to align with the company's goals. Sophia's lips pressed into a firm line. And yet, despite my qualifications, you seem hesitant to acknowledge that I would be an asset. I have proven leadership skills, financial expertise, and a strong track record of problem-solving under pressure. So tell me, Mr. Thompson, what exactly is making you hesitate? David let out a short, dry chuckle. You're very direct, Miss Carter. Sophia didn't waver. I have to be, because too often, people like me are dismissed before we even get a chance to prove ourselves. But I don't accept rejection that isn't based on merit. I've worked too hard, achieved too much, to be told that I don't fit without a real explanation. David's smile was thin. We're simply looking for the best candidate. Sophia held his gaze. Then let my qualifications speak for themselves. For the first time, David had no immediate response. He studied her for a long moment, then slowly exhaled. The silence in the room was heavy, but Sophia refused to be the first to break it. She had made her point. The question was, would he actually listen? David let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, as if contemplating his next words. Then, with a dismissive sigh, he leaned forward and shut the folder containing Sophia's resume with an audible thud. Well, Miss Carter, he said, his tone clipped and final. We appreciate your time today. However, at this moment, I don't believe you would be the right fit for Everton Corporation. Sophia felt her stomach tighten, though she refused to let her expression falter. May I ask why? David barely glanced at her as he straightened some papers on his desk. As I mentioned earlier, we look for candidates who seamlessly integrate into our existing culture. While your experience is certainly noteworthy, I'm afraid we're moving in a different direction. He didn't even bother to pretend it was about her skills or qualifications. Sophia sat there for a moment, forcing herself to remain composed. She had worked too hard, prepared too long, to be dismissed so effortlessly. She could feel the sting of rejection, the unfairness of it all, but she refused to let David see any trace of weakness. I see, she said, her voice calm but firm. Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. David gave her a short, perfunctory nod before turning his attention to his computer, already treating her as if she no longer existed. Sophia stood up, gathering her bag with measured movements. As she walked toward the door, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass wall, standing tall, poised, unwavering. But just beyond that glass, she noticed something else. A few Everton Corp employees were standing near the hallway, stealing discreet glances at her as she walked past. Some whispered in hushed tones. Others quickly looked away when her gaze met theirs. She recognized that look. They had already assumed her failure. Sophia kept her head high as she stepped into the elevator. The moment the doors slid shut, she let out a slow breath. This wasn't the first time she had been unfairly dismissed, but somehow, this one stung differently. Perhaps because she knew, deep down, that she had done everything right. Her credentials were solid. Her answers had been precise, professional, and compelling. There was no logical reason for her rejection, except one that no one wanted to say out loud. Sophia clenched her fists for a moment before exhaling, forcing herself to release the tension. No, she wasn't going to let this be the end. She had worked too hard to stop now. If Everton Corp wouldn't give her a chance, she would find another way to make them see her worth. One rejection wasn't going to define her, and one man's bias wasn't going to determine her future. With that thought, she stepped out into the city, the cold air hitting her skin as determination settled deep within her. This wasn't over, not even close. The taxi ride home was quiet, save for the hum of the city outside. Sophia sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind replaying every moment of the interview, every dismissive glance, every veiled comment. The sting of rejection was sharp, but beneath it was something stronger, determination. As she stepped into her apartment, the familiar scent of lavender filled the air. She had always found comfort in her space, a small but elegant loft with large windows overlooking the city skyline. It was her sanctuary, a place where she reminded herself of everything she had achieved. She dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and let out a slow breath. Just as she reached for a glass of water, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. Mr. Lancaster. Her chest tightened slightly. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks. "Hello?" she answered, pressing the phone to her ear. "Sophia." The warm but slightly raspy voice greeted her. "It's been a while." She smiled softly, leaning against the counter. "It has. I'm sorry I haven't called." "Nonsense, my dear," he said. "You've been busy, I'm sure, but I had to call you today. Something's been on my mind." Sophia frowned. "Everything okay?" There was a brief pause on the other end, then a sigh. "I heard about your interview." Sophia's stomach dropped. "How?" "I have my ways," Lancaster chuckled lightly. "You forget I still know people in places." Sophia exhaled, pinching the bridge of her nose. "It didn't go well, but that's nothing new." "I know," he said gently, "and that's why I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." His tone had shifted, carrying an unusual weight. Sophia straightened, suddenly on edge. "Mr. Lancaster," she said carefully. "What is it?" Another pause. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "It's time you knew the truth about your father." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. My father?" "Yes," Lancaster said. "It's something your mother never wanted you to carry, but I think she was wrong. I think you have a right to know." Sophia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She had spent her whole life with only fragments of information about her father. Her mother had always been vague, always changed the subject. She had accepted the absence, buried the questions deep inside. But now, she gripped the counter, her knuckles whitening. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a beat of silence. Then Lancaster finally said it. "Sophia, your father is Richard Everton." The words slammed into her like a freight train. Her breath hitched. She blinked, as if trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Richard Everton, CEO of Everton Corporation, the same company that had just rejected her, the same man who had unknowingly shut the door in his own daughter's face. Sophia felt the world shift beneath her feet, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sophia gripped the phone tighter, her breath unsteady. "Richard Everton?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, my dear," Mr. Lancaster said softly. "Your father is the man who built Everton Corp, the very company that turned you away today." Her mind reeled, struggling to process the words. Richard Everton, the powerful CEO, the man whose name commanded respect in the financial world, the same man who had made hiring decisions that shaped entire industries, was her father? That's not possible, she finally said, shaking her head even though he couldn't see her. My mother she never talked about him. She wanted to protect you, Lancaster said gently. She believed keeping his identity a secret was best. She never wanted you to feel like you owed him anything or lived in his shadow. She wanted you to build your own success. Sophia felt her knees weaken, and she sank onto the couch. But if that's true, why didn't he ever reach out? Did he know about me? A heavy pause. Then Lancaster sighed. No, he never knew. Your mother made sure of that. Sophia clenched her jaw, emotions swirling inside her. Shock, disbelief, anger. So he just went on with his life, running his company, never once wondering if he had a child out there? It's not that simple, Lancaster said. Your mother and Richard were young when they met. He loved her, but his family disapproved of their relationship. They pressured him to focus on his career, to marry within their social circle. When your mother found out she was pregnant, she left before he ever had a chance to choose between her and his family. Sophia swallowed hard. She had spent her entire life thinking her father was just an unknown figure, someone who had abandoned her before she was born. But now the truth felt even more painful. So he never had a choice, she murmured. No, Lancaster confirmed. And now, after all these years, fate has brought you to his doorstep without either of you knowing. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, her pulse racing. This wasn't just about a job rejection anymore. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She had unknowingly walked into her father's empire, only to be dismissed as if she were nothing. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Anger, hurt, confusion. She had spent years proving herself, fighting for opportunities that should have been hers based on merit alone. And now, she realized that her bloodline tied her to one of the most powerful men in the industry. And yet, he had looked at her today and seen nothing but another unworthy applicant. A silence stretched between them before Lancaster spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. You have a choice now, Sophia. You can walk away, let this remain a secret, or you can face him. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief moment, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. Her entire life had been built on fighting for her place in the world. Now she had a chance to fight for something more, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. Sophia closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter as fragmented memories surfaced. Memories she hadn't dared to examine in years. Her mother, Elena Carter, had always been a woman of quiet strength. She had raised Sophia alone, working tirelessly to provide for her, never once showing regret for the life she had chosen. But there had been moments, rare and fleeting, where pain flickered in her mother's eyes. Moments when Sophia had asked about her father. Asterisk, who was he, Mama? Asterisk, Sophia had asked as a child, her small hands tugging at her mother's dress. Elena would always smile, stroking her daughter's curls with a tenderness that masked something deeper. He was a man with dreams, she would say. A man who had a world laid out for him before he ever had a chance to choose his own path. As a child, Sophia hadn't understood. But now, the pieces were falling into place. She remembered nights when her mother sat by the window, staring at the city lights, lost in thought. She had assumed it was exhaustion, the burden of single motherhood weighing on her. But now she realized it had been something more: regret, longing. Richard Everton had never known about her, but that didn't mean he hadn't been loved. Sophia's heart ached as she recalled a time years ago when she had found an old photograph tucked inside a book in her mother's study. A young Elena Carter, laughing in the arms of a man she didn't recognize at the time. A tall, confident man with piercing blue eyes and a smile that, now that she thought about it, bore an uncanny resemblance to her own. Her mother had taken the photograph from her gently, her fingers lingering over the image for just a moment before tucking it away. "Some things are better left in the past, my love," she had whispered. Sophia never saw the photograph again. But now, As she sat in her apartment, the truth crashing down around her, she realized that the past had never really left. Her mother had walked away from Richard Everton, choosing to raise Sophia on her own rather than risk being cast aside by his powerful family. Had she ever regretted it? Had she ever wished she had told him the truth? A sharp pang twisted in Sophia's chest. Her entire life, she had believed she had no ties to the world of power and wealth. She had built herself up from nothing, believing that every opportunity, every challenge, was hers to conquer alone. But now she knew she had been part of this world all along, and the man who had unknowingly denied her a place in it was her own father. The realization sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. Anger, betrayal, sorrow, and something else she couldn't quite name. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about a life she had never known, a history that had been kept from her, and a father who had been a stranger to her until now. And for the first time in her life, she had to decide if she was ready to face the truth. Sophia sat in silence, staring at the city lights flickering beyond her window. Her mind was racing, caught between the weight of the past and the urgency of the present. The revelation of her father's identity had shaken her to the core, but now, a bigger question loomed over her. What was she going to do about it? Her entire life, she had fought for every opportunity, proving herself over and over again in a world that often refused to see her worth. And now, the irony was suffocating. She had just been dismissed by her own father's company, without him even knowing who she was. Part of her wanted to let it go, to walk away, just as her mother had all those years ago. After all, Richard Everton had never been a part of her life. She had never needed him before, so why should she need him now? But another part of her, the part that had spent years pushing back against injustice, against every rejection that came not from lack of ability, but from bias, refused to let this stand. She replayed the interview in her mind, the cold dismissiveness in David Thompson's voice, the way he had tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. He had written her off before she even had a chance to prove herself. And what stung even more was that Richard Everton, her own father, had created this company. He had shaped its culture. Even if he hadn't directly dismissed her, he had allowed men like David Thompson to flourish under his leadership. Could she really walk away, knowing that the same company that rejected her was the legacy she had unknowingly been denied? She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She had two choices. She could disappear, keep the secret buried, and let this moment define her as just another rejection. Or, she could confront the truth, face Richard Everton, and force him to see what he had unknowingly cast aside. But if she did, it wouldn't just be about proving something to herself. It wouldn't just be about getting back at the company for its bias. It would be about justice, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been rejected because they didn't fit some unspoken mold. Sophia exhaled sharply, gripping the armrest of her chair. The easy choice would be to leave it all behind. But Sophia Carter had never been one to take the easy path. And she wasn't going to start now. The next morning, Sophia woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The uncertainty, the shock, the hesitation. All of it had burned away, leaving only one undeniable truth. She needed to face Richard Everton. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about who she was. She dressed with purpose, choosing a sleek navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse. Professional, polished, and commanding. If she was going to confront the CEO of Everton Corp, she needed to look like she belonged in that world. As she stepped out of her apartment and into the bustling city streets, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. For years, she had walked into interviews prepared to prove herself. But today, she was walking into an office to claim her rightful place. Everton Corp's glass tower loomed ahead, just as imposing as it had been the day before. But this time, she wasn't here as an applicant. She was here as his daughter. Sophia strode through the grand lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The receptionist at the front desk glanced up, recognition flashing in her eyes. "Miss Carter," she said, surprised. "I thought your interview was yesterday." "It was," Sophia replied smoothly. "But today, I'm here to see Richard Everton. It's urgent." The receptionist blinked, hesitating. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Everton doesn't take unannounced meetings. Do you have an appointment?" Sophia's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. "No, but if you tell him my name, I guarantee he'll want to see me." The receptionist gave a polite but doubtful smile. "Mr. Everton's schedule is booked for the day. If you'd like, I can connect you with someone from his executive team." "No," Sophia interrupted, her gaze steady. "This is personal. He'll want to hear what I have to say." She wasn't leaving until she spoke to him. A security guard near the entrance shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Sophia saw the way the receptionist's fingers hovered over the phone, likely debating whether to call security. She had one shot at this. Taking a deep breath, she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "Tell Richard Everton that Sophia Carter is here. Tell him it's about Elena Carter." The receptionist froze, her fingers gripping the desk. The name Elena Carter had struck something, just as Sophia had hoped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without another word, the receptionist picked up the phone, her voice suddenly quieter. Sophia stood tall, unshaken, as she waited for the moment that would change everything. She had made her move. Now all that was left was to see how Richard Everton would respond. Sophia stood her ground as the receptionist spoke into the phone, her expression shifting between confusion and uncertainty. She knew that name. Elena Carter had struck a nerve, but whether it would be enough to get her in was another matter. The receptionist hung up after a brief exchange, then gave Sophia a tight-lipped smile. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but Mr. Everton is unavailable at the moment." Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Unavailable? Or unwilling to see me?" The receptionist hesitated. "Mr. Everton's schedule is extremely tight. If you'd like to leave a message—" "I didn't come here to leave a message," Sophia interrupted, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I came here to see him, and trust me, he's going to want to hear what I have to say." The receptionist shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, but we can't allow walk-ins, even for urgent matters." Sophia exhaled sharply. "Then tell me something. Did you even tell him my name? Did you tell him I said, Elena Carter?" The receptionist avoided her gaze, confirming what Sophia suspected. The message had never reached him. Before she could respond, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the conversation. "Is there a problem here?" Sophia turned to see a security guard approaching, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning her with polite suspicion. He wasn't aggressive, but the message was clear. She was unwelcome. "No problem at all," the receptionist said quickly, glancing between them. "Miss Carter was just leaving." Sophia clenched her jaw. This was ridiculous. She had spent her entire life earning her place in the corporate world, only to now be treated like she was trespassing in a building owned by the father she had never met. "I'm not leaving," she said evenly, shifting her attention to the security guard. "I need to speak with Richard Everton. It's a family matter." The guard's brow furrowed. "Family? Yes," the receptionist scoffed, regaining her confidence. "Miss Carter, that's a bold claim, and even if it were true, this isn't the way to handle it." Sophia took a deep breath. "Then what is the way? Because I tried calling. I tried going through the proper channels. And now I'm here, being turned away before he even knows I exist." The security guard hesitated, clearly unsure. But before he could say anything, the receptionist shook her head. "Miss Carter, if you refuse to leave, we'll have to escort you out." Sophia inhaled deeply, steadying herself. They were trying to erase her before she even had a chance to be seen. But she wasn't walking away. Not until Richard Everton himself told her to. Sophia clenched her fists, forcing herself to take a steady breath. She had come here prepared to confront Richard Everton in person, but if they were going to block her at every turn, She needed a different approach. Fine. If they wouldn't let her through, then she would make sure her words did. Without another word to the receptionist or security guard, she turned on her heel and walked toward a small seating area near the lobby. She pulled out her notebook and pen, flipping to a blank page. She hesitated for just a moment before pressing the pen to paper. Richard Everton, my name is Sophia Carter, and I believe you need to hear what I have to say. You don't know me, but I know you. I know the company you built, the empire you created. I also know that you just rejected me from an interview without ever realizing who I truly am. I am the daughter of Elena Carter. I am also your daughter. You may not have known about me, but that doesn't change the truth. And it certainly doesn't change the fact that I just walked into your company, the company that carries your name, hoping to earn a place on my own merit, only to be dismissed before I was even given a fair chance. I am not writing this letter to ask for a job. I don't want handouts. I never have. I am writing this because after years of silence, after decades of not knowing you, I think it's time we finally meet. I will be waiting for your response. ***, Sophia Carter ***. She stared at the words for a moment, letting them sink in. This was the moment where everything changed. Either Richard Everton would read this letter and acknowledge her, or he would choose to ignore her just as his company had done. She folded the letter carefully, placing it inside an envelope. With steady steps, she returned to the front desk and slid the envelope across to the receptionist. "Make sure Richard Everton gets this," she said, her voice unwavering. The receptionist hesitated, but something in Sophia's gaze must have struck her. She took the envelope, glancing at it before nodding. Sophia exhaled, turning away. Now all she could do was wait. Would he read it? And if he did, ***, what would he do next? ***. Sophia sat in her apartment, staring at her phone on the table as if willing it to ring. The letter had been delivered. Now all she could do was wait. Her fingers drummed anxiously against her knee. She had never been the type to doubt herself, but this was different. This wasn't just about a job or proving her worth in the corporate world. This was about family. Would Richard Everton even acknowledge her? Or would he dismiss her the way David Thompson had? She told herself she was prepared for either outcome, but deep down, she knew the truth. ***, she wanted him to accept her. ***, not as an employee, not as a candidate, but as his daughter. The thought sent a strange, unexpected ache through her chest. She had spent her whole life without him, never needing him, never expecting anything from him. So why did this matter so much now? The silence in her apartment felt heavier than usual. The city outside bustled with life, but inside, all she could hear was the racing of her own thoughts. Had he read the letter? Was he thinking about her? Or was he about to let her down before she even had the chance to know him? Richard Everton sat in his expansive corner office, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had spent the last 4 decades building Everton Corp into a financial empire, and nothing, absolutely nothing, ever took him by surprise anymore. Until today, a single envelope lay on his desk, its contents spread before him. He had read the letter once, then again, and yet the words remained as incomprehensible as they were the first time. "I am the daughter of Elena Carter. I am also your daughter." Richard exhaled slowly, leaning back in his leather chair. His fingers drummed against the polished mahogany desk, a habit of his when he was deep in thought. It had to be a mistake, a lie, a misunderstanding. Elena. He hadn't heard that name in decades, yet the moment he read it, the memories came rushing back. Memories he had locked away a long time ago. Elena Carter, the woman he had once loved, in a different lifetime, before expectations and obligations had pulled him away. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, recalling the way she had laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams. They had been young, ambitious, reckless in their love for each other. But his family had never approved. Back then, he had been forced to choose between love and legacy. And in the end, he had done what was expected of him. But now, Now he was being told that choice had come with a consequence he had never known. A daughter. He shook his head, standing abruptly. He paced to the window, staring down at the bustling streets below. This had to be a mistake. And yet, something inside him whispered otherwise. Elena had disappeared from his life so suddenly. She had never asked for anything, never reached out. Had she kept this from him all these years? And if she had, why? Richard clenched his jaw. He didn't like unanswered questions. And this was one question he needed to get to the bottom of. Richard Everton sat back down at his desk, the letter still in his hands. His grip on the paper tightened slightly as his mind raced through the possibilities. If this was true, if Sophia Carter was really his daughter, then his entire world had just shifted. He needed to be certain. Richard reached for his intercom, pressing a button. Within seconds, his assistant, Margaret Fields, stepped in. She was a woman of precision, someone who had been by his side for nearly 20 years, and he trusted her to handle delicate matters. "Yes, Mr. Everton?" she asked, her voice calm as always. "I need you to find everything you can about a woman named Elena Carter and her daughter, Sophia Carter," he said, placing the letter on the desk. "Cross-check dates, locations, anything that might verify the claims in this letter." Margaret's eyes flickered over the letter briefly before she nodded. "Understood. I'll have a full report within the hour." Richard exhaled, his gaze drifting back to the words on the page. Was it possible? Had he truly gone his entire life never knowing he had a child? The thought unsettled him. An hour later, Margaret returned, holding a thin folder. "Sir, I pulled everything I could from public records. Elena Carter passed away years ago. As for Sophia Carter, she has an impeccable academic and professional record. Top-tier MBA, excellent work history. But I also found this." She handed him a photograph. It was Sophia. She was standing in front of a university banner, shaking hands with a professor. Richard's eyes locked onto her face. And in that instant, something inside him shifted. She had his eyes. A deep, undeniable feeling settled over him. A recognition he couldn't ignore. His daughter. Richard straightened, his voice firm. "Set up a meeting. I want her here. Today." Margaret hesitated. "Should I go through HR or contact her directly?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Go directly. No middlemen. No barriers. She came here once and she was turned away. That won't happen again." Margaret nodded and exited the room. Richard remained still, his gaze lingering on the photograph. For the first time in decades, he was about to come face to face with a part of his past he had never known. And with it, a future he never expected. Sophia stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor of Everton Corp, her heartbeat steady but her mind racing. This was it. She had spent the past 24 hours questioning everything. Her past, her identity, her decision to send that letter. And now, she was about to meet the man whose blood ran through her veins. The executive floor was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling lower levels. The air carried a weight of authority, the kind that came from decisions worth millions being made every day. But none of that mattered to her right now. At the end of the long corridor stood two towering mahogany doors. Margaret Fields, Richard Everton's assistant, greeted her with a composed expression. "He's expecting you, Miss Carter." Sophia swallowed and gave a small nod. "Thank you." Margaret opened the door and stepped aside. Sophia squared her shoulders and walked in. The office was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city skyline. The furniture was sleek, every detail meticulously placed. And in the center of it all, standing by his desk, was Richard Everton. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He was taller than she had expected, his presence commanding. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly groomed, his tailored suit a reminder of the empire he had built. But what caught her off guard was the way he was studying her. His gaze wasn't one of indifference or dismissal. It was one of recognition. as if he, too, saw something familiar in her face. Sophia exhaled, steadying herself. "Mr. Everton," she greeted, keeping her voice even. Richard's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes never left hers. "Sophia," he said at last. His voice was deep, controlled, yet there was something beneath it, something she couldn't quite place. For the first time in her life, she was standing face to face with her father, and she had no idea what would happen next. Richard Everton remained standing, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his desk as he studied Sophia. His mind was racing, but his face remained composed. ***, years of corporate discipline wouldn't allow him to betray the shock that coursed through him. ***. Still, the weight of her presence settled heavily in the room. "You sent me a letter," he finally said, his voice steady, though slightly lower than before, "claiming you're my daughter." Sophia met his gaze without hesitation. "I didn't claim anything, Mr. Everton. I told you the truth." A sharp silence followed, the kind that pressed against the walls, stretching the space between them. Richard exhaled slowly, moving around his desk and taking a seat. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit," he said. Sophia hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and lowering herself into the chair. She had walked into this office ready to fight, but now, sitting across from him, the weight of everything, her past, her mother, the years of separation, settled over her. Richard laced his fingers together, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Tell me everything." Sophia took a breath. "My mother was Elena Carter. You met her over 30 years ago. She never told me much about you, only that you were someone she had loved, someone she had to leave behind." Richard's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his gaze at the mention of her name. "She left because she was pregnant," Sophia continued, her voice steady but firm. "Because she knew your family would never accept her, and because she didn't want to force you to choose between her and them." Richard inhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. He blinked, processing her words, but said nothing. "She never asked you for help, never reached out," Sophia went on. "She raised me on her own, working twice as hard to give me opportunities she never had. She didn't want me to grow up feeling like I was a mistake. So she kept your name out of my life." Richard's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. "And you? When did you find out?" "Yesterday." His eyes widened. ***, just slightly, but enough for her to notice. ***. Sophia folded her hands in her lap, keeping her voice even. "I didn't come looking for you, Mr. Everton. I came to Everton Corp for a job. I didn't know who you were until after I was rejected, because your company, the one that bears your name, turned me away before I even had a real chance." Something in Richard's expression darkened. For a man who had spent his life controlling every aspect of his world, this revelation had shattered something. Sophia watched him carefully. "I didn't come here for your money. I didn't come here to demand anything from you. I came because, after all these years, I figured you deserved to know the truth." Richard leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. His face was unreadable, but his voice was lower now, quieter. "And what do you expect me to do with this truth, Sophia?" Sophia exhaled, meeting his gaze. "That's up to you." Silence filled the room once more. For the first time in his life, Richard Everton had no immediate answer. Richard Everton sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the young woman sitting across from him. His daughter. The words felt foreign, almost impossible to process. Yet, as he looked at her, really looked at her, he could no longer deny the truth. Her features, though shaped by time and experience, carried traces of someone he once knew. Elena. The same sharp intelligence in her eyes, the same quiet strength in the way she held herself. And then there was something else, something even more unsettling. He saw himself in her. Richard swallowed, shifting his hands on the desk. He had spent his entire life making calculated decisions, predicting market shifts, expanding his empire with ruthless precision. He had prepared for everything except this. The weight of her words pressed down on him like an avalanche. Asterisk, she never asked for your help. She never reached out. Asterisk, he had spent decades believing that his past with Elena had simply faded into time, that their separation had been the end of their story. But now, he saw it for what it truly was. Asterisk, asterisk, a decision that had changed two lives forever. Asterisk, asterisk. His chest tightened as a thought struck him. Asterisk, asterisk, Elena had been pregnant when she left. Asterisk, asterisk. She had walked away, knowing he would have chosen her, knowing he would have fought for her. And yet, she had never given him that choice. Sophia had grown up without him. Had she struggled? Had she ever wondered why he wasn't there? Did she resent him? His fingers curled into a fist as the realization settled deep in his bones. Asterisk, asterisk, he had missed everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Her first steps, her first words, her childhood. While he had been building his company, securing his legacy, expanding his wealth, his daughter had been growing up without a father, without knowing where she came from. The thought cut deeper than he expected. He took a slow breath, his voice lower when he finally spoke. Your mother never told me. Sophia nodded, her expression unreadable. I know, Richard exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. I should have known. I should have. He stopped himself, pressing his lips into a firm line. Sophia tilted her head slightly, studying him. Would it have changed anything? Richard looked at her then, really looked at her. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure of the answer. Would it have changed everything? Or would he have been the same man, making the same decisions, walking the same path, unaware of what he had lost along the way? He had spent his life shaping the future of Everton Corporation. And in doing so, he had lost the only future that had ever truly mattered. Regret settled deep in his chest, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. And for the first time in decades, Richard Everton felt something unfamiliar, helplessness. Sophia watched Richard Everton carefully, noting the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders seemed heavier, the way his usually sharp, unwavering gaze faltered just slightly. For the first time, he looked less like the powerful CEO of Everton Corp and more like a man grappling with a truth he never expected to face. But she wasn't here just for his regret. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. Let me ask you something, Mr. Everton. Richard's eyes lifted to hers, guarded. If you had known who I was, if you had known from the start that I was your daughter, would I have been rejected like I was yesterday? A flicker of something. Asterisk, asterisk, guilt, perhaps asterisk, asterisk, crossed his face, but he quickly masked it. Sophia, that's... Be honest, she interrupted, holding his gaze. Would I have been dismissed in that interview? Would David Thompson have brushed me aside the way he did? Richard exhaled, his fingers tapping against the desk in thought. Finally, he answered, his voice quieter than before. No. Sophia's chest tightened, but she wasn't surprised. Why not? She pressed. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. Because, if I had known, I would have made sure you were treated fairly. Sophia let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Exactly. Because I'm your daughter. Silence settled between them, heavy and unspoken. Richard ran a hand through his hair. Sophia, I can't change what happened in that interview. I didn't know who you were. But that's the problem, isn't it? She shot back. If I weren't your daughter, if I were just another applicant, then my rejection would have stood. David Thompson would have still dismissed me, and you would have never known about it. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't deny it. Sophia's voice didn't waver. How many other people has your company turned away just because they didn't fit? How many qualified candidates were rejected simply because someone like David Thompson decided they weren't worth the chance? Richard inhaled deeply, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. I worked for everything I have, Sophia continued. I didn't come here looking for a favor. I didn't come here to ask for a place in your company because of my last name. I came because I was qualified. But that wasn't enough, was it? Richard remained silent, absorbing her words. "I know I caught you off guard," she admitted, "and I don't expect you to suddenly rewrite history, but you need to ask yourself this. ***, if I had never sent that letter, would you have ever known what kind of company you were really running?" The question hung in the air, a challenge, a truth he could no longer ignore. For the first time in his life, Richard Everton had no immediate answer. The following morning, a sense of unease settled over the executive wing of Everton Corp. Senior board members had been summoned for an emergency meeting. ***, a rare occurrence that usually signaled something serious. David Thompson sat at the long, polished conference table, his fingers lightly tapping against the wood. He had been called in without an explanation, but the tension in the air made it clear that this was no ordinary meeting. Around him, other executives murmured quietly, speculating about what could have possibly demanded the attention of Richard Everton himself. Then the door to the boardroom swung open. Richard entered, his expression unreadable, his presence alone commanding silence. Behind him, Margaret Fields carried a thin folder and took a seat near the far end of the table. "Good morning," Richard said, his voice calm, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. "Let's get right to the point. We're here to discuss the hiring practices of this company. Specifically, a recent rejection that raises serious concerns." David straightened slightly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Sir, if this is about our recruitment policies, I can assure you that." Richard held up a hand, cutting him off. "This isn't a policy discussion. It's about Sophia Carter." At the mention of her name, David's smirk faltered. His fingers twitched slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. Richard leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "Miss Carter interviewed for a managerial position under your department. A highly qualified candidate, MBA from one of the top universities, extensive experience, strong leadership skills. Yet, she was dismissed without serious consideration." David hesitated for only a second before responding smoothly. "Sir, we conduct dozens of interviews each week. Not every candidate is the right fit for our company. I made a judgment call based on what I believed was best for our team." Richard's expression remained impassive, but his gaze sharpened. "Did you? Because from where I stand, it seems your judgment call was based on something other than her qualifications." The room went silent. David shifted uncomfortably but forced a confident smile. "With all due respect, Mr. Everton, I don't see why this particular case warrants such scrutiny." Richard exhaled slowly. "Let me make it clear, then." He turned to Margaret, who wordlessly slid the folder across the table toward him. He flipped it open. "Here's what I see," Richard continued, his voice like steel. "Sophia Carter outperformed most candidates in qualifications. Yet, in her evaluation notes, there is no legitimate reason for her rejection, just vague comments about cultural fit and team synergy." He glanced up, his eyes cold. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, what exactly does that mean?" David hesitated, his usual confidence starting to crack. "It means that beyond just skills, we look for people who align with our company's work culture." Richard raised an eyebrow. "And does our work culture exclude highly qualified professionals who happen to be black?" A sharp silence fell over the room. David's face paled slightly. "Of course not. That's an unfair accusation." Richard's gaze didn't waver. "Then explain to me why a candidate with every required qualification was rejected without a second round of interviews. Explain why someone with years of leadership experience was dismissed while we've hired lesser qualified candidates. Explain why someone—" He paused, his voice dropping just slightly, "who happens to be my daughter was turned away before she even had a chance to prove herself." The entire room stiffened. David's eyes widened. His lips parted slightly as he registered what he had just heard. Sophia Carter, Richard Everton's daughter. David swallowed, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He had dismissed Richard Everton's own flesh and blood without a second thought. For the first time since the meeting started, he had nothing to say. Richard let the silence stretch before speaking again. So I'll ask you again, Mr. Thompson. His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Why was Sophia Carter rejected? David opened his mouth, but no words came out. And in that moment, he knew his career was hanging by a thread. David Thompson felt the blood drain from his face. His usually composed demeanor wavered as the weight of Richard Everton's words settled over him. Sophia Carter, his daughter? His pulse quickened. How was this possible? His mind raced back to the interview, to the way he had dismissed her with barely a second thought. He had assumed she was just another candidate, another overqualified applicant who didn't fit the culture of Everton Corporation. But now he had rejected the CEO's own daughter. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Eyes from every corner of the room were locked on him, waiting for his response. David forced a weak chuckle, an attempt to break the tension. Sir, I had no idea. He leaned forward, trying to regain control. Had I known, of course, things would have been different. This was never personal. Richard's expression didn't change. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Thompson. It shouldn't have mattered who she was. She should have been judged on her qualifications, nothing else. David's throat went dry. He needed to spin this fast. Mr. Everton, I assure you, we were simply looking for the best cultural fit for the team, he said, his voice wavering slightly. Sophia Carter is clearly an exceptional candidate, but at the time I felt that. Stop, Richard interrupted, his voice sharp. David swallowed hard. Richard exhaled, shaking his head slightly. You didn't even give her a fair chance. You dismissed her before she could even show what she was capable of. Tell me, how many other candidates have been turned away under the same vague reasoning? David opened his mouth, but Richard wasn't done. You talk about culture fit as if it's an objective standard. But let's be honest, it's your standard. It's a system designed to keep people like you comfortable while keeping others out. David shifted uncomfortably. Sir, that's not true. Richard's gaze bore into him. Then tell me, if Sophia hadn't been my daughter, would you have ever reconsidered your decision? David hesitated, and in that split second of silence, everyone knew the answer. Richard let out a slow, measured breath, his disappointment palpable. That's what I thought. David's mind screamed for a way out, a way to salvage this disaster. But he could already see it in Richard's eyes. Asterisk, asterisk, he had already lost. Asterisk, asterisk. And no amount of excuses would save him now. Richard Everton sat motionless, his fingers interlaced tightly as he absorbed everything that had just unfolded before him. The weight of it all pressed against his chest like a stone. Asterisk, asterisk, bias, exclusion, injustice, right here in his own company. Asterisk, asterisk, a company that bore his name. He had spent decades building Everton Corp, priding himself on its success, on its so-called meritocracy. But now, staring across the table at David Thompson, a man who had risen through the ranks under his watch, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Asterisk, asterisk, anger. Asterisk, asterisk. Not the kind of anger that came from a bad deal or a failing investment. No, this was something deeper. This was betrayal. Richard exhaled slowly, his voice low and controlled. Asterisk, asterisk, too controlled. Asterisk, asterisk, Mr. Thompson, do you realize what you've done? David swallowed hard. Sir, You stood in front of a highly qualified candidate and dismissed her before she even had a chance. Richard continued, his voice like steel. Not because she lacked skills, not because she wasn't capable, but because she didn't fit. David's mouth opened, but Richard cut him off. How long has this been happening? He demanded, his piercing gaze shifting around the room, sweeping over every executive present. How many other talented people have been shut out of this company because of your personal biases? Because they didn't fit into some outdated idea of who belongs here. A heavy silence blanketed the room. No one spoke. No one dared. Richard's grip on the armrest tightened. I built this company from the ground up. I expected it to be run with excellence, fairness, and integrity. But what I see now, he let out a humorless chuckle. It's nothing but a rigged game. His gaze snapped back to David. Tell me, how many other people did you dismiss like Sophia Carter? How many other resumes were thrown away because someone looked different from what you expected? David paled. Sir, I assure you, don't. Richard's voice dropped, colder than ever. Don't insult me with empty assurances. Another silence. He shook his head, more at himself than at David. He had been blind. He had assumed Everton Corp was above these problems. But today he had been forced to confront the ugly truth. And he hated what he saw. Finally, Richard exhaled sharply. There will be consequences for this, Thompson. For you. And for anyone else who thinks they can play gatekeeper in my company. David flinched, his usual confidence shattered. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. Because starting today, things are going to change. And you are either part of that change or you're gone. Another silence. Then, in the coldest voice the room had ever heard, he added, asterisk, consider your position very carefully, asterisk. And just like that, David Thompson knew his time at Everton Corp was over. The weight of the silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Every executive present knew they were witnessing something historic, something unprecedented in the long, untouchable reign of Everton Corporation. Richard Everton sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled in front of him, his expression carved from stone. His gaze never wavered from David Thompson, the man who had once been a trusted member of his executive team. But trust was gone now. You had every opportunity to correct your course, Richard said, his voice even but cold. You could have judged candidates based on their abilities, their qualifications, and their potential. Instead, you created barriers. You made decisions based on personal bias, not merit. David swallowed hard, but he didn't dare interrupt. Richard let the silence stretch for a moment longer, then exhaled slowly. As of this moment, you are no longer employed at Everton Corporation. A stunned hush fell over the room. David's face paled. Sir, please, This is not up for discussion, Richard cut in sharply. You violated the core principles of this company, and worse, you did it with complete confidence that no one would hold you accountable. That ends today. David's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an ally, but no one would meet his gaze. There was no saving him now. Richard leaned forward, his voice steady but final. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. David opened his mouth as if to argue, but one look at Richard's face told him it was useless. His career, his entire reputation, had just collapsed in a matter of minutes. Without another word, David Thompson pushed back his chair and stood. He straightened his tie, but there was no hiding the slight tremor in his hands. With a stiff nod, he turned and strode toward the door. Just as he reached it, Richard spoke again. And David froze, his hand gripping the doorknob. This company will never make the same mistake again. David swallowed hard before stepping out, the door clicking shut behind him. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Richard turned to the rest of the executives, his expression unreadable. Everton Corp will be implementing immediate changes in our hiring policies. The era of exclusion ends today. No one dared object, because Richard Everton had spoken. After the tense boardroom meeting, Richard Everton retreated to his office, closing the heavy doors behind him. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. The weight of everything, his past, his blind spots, the injustice within his own company, settled deep in his chest. But beyond all of that, there was Sophia, his daughter, a truth he had spent decades unaware of, a truth that had changed everything. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened, his voice steady. Come in. The door opened, and there she was, Sophia Carter. She stepped inside with her usual poise, but Richard noticed something different this time. She wasn't just here as an outsider demanding recognition. She was here as someone who belonged. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Richard gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. Sophia hesitated for only a second before lowering herself into the seat. Richard exhaled and leaned forward slightly. I should have known about you, he admitted. His voice wasn't just controlled authority, it carried something deeper now. Regret. I should have been there. Sophia studied him carefully. You didn't know. That doesn't change the fact that I missed everything, he said quietly. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then Richard straightened. I built this company believing it stood for excellence, fairness, and opportunity. But I see now that I let people like David Thompson shape parts of it into something I never intended. His gaze sharpened. That ends now, and I want you to be part of that change. Sophia frowned slightly. What are you saying? Richard let out a slow breath. I'm offering you a position here. ***, a leadership role, not as a favor, but because you deserve it. ***, because you should have had that opportunity in the first place. Sophia's expression remained unreadable. And if I say no? Richard gave a small, knowing smile. Then I'll respect that decision. But something tells me you don't walk away from challenges. Sophia let out a short chuckle, shaking her head. No, I don't. Richard nodded, then leaned forward slightly. Then come work with me. Help me fix this. Let's build the kind of company that should have existed all along. Sophia studied him for a long moment. This wasn't about a name or legacy. It was about making a difference. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about something more. ***, a chance to build the relationship they had both lost. ***. Finally, she exhaled and met his gaze. All right, Mr. Everton, she said, a small but determined smile forming. Let's see what we can do together. Sophia leaned back slightly in her chair, studying Richard Everton carefully. The man sitting across from her was a titan in the business world, a man who had shaped an empire with his own hands. And now he was offering her a seat at the table. But she wasn't going to accept it blindly. I appreciate the offer, she said slowly, her voice measured. But if I join Everton Corp, it won't be because of my last name. It won't be because I'm your daughter. Richard's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something. ***, approval, perhaps. ***. Sophia continued, leaning forward slightly. I've spent my entire life proving myself. Every interview, every job, every challenge. I fought for it. And I refuse to let that change now. Richard nodded, his fingers interlaced on the desk. And that's exactly why you belong here. Sophia raised an eyebrow. I'm not asking you to take a position out of obligation, he clarified. I'm asking because I need someone like you. Someone who isn't afraid to challenge the system. Someone who sees the flaws and is willing to fix them. Sophia exhaled, considering his words. Then that's what I'll do. But understand this. I won't be another executive sitting in a cushy office, riding on a name I never knew. If I take this job, I want real responsibility. Real work. Richard let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. You really are my daughter. Sophia smirked. I suppose time will tell. Richard extended a hand across the desk. A silent agreement. A new beginning. Sophia hesitated for only a second before reaching forward and shaking his hand. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't about a name. It was about what she could build. What they could build. Together. The atmosphere in the grand conference hall of Everton Corp was electric. Employees filled the space, murmuring in hushed tones, some curious, others uncertain about what was about to unfold. The company had been through a whirlwind of changes in the past few weeks, and now all eyes were on the woman standing at the podium, Sophia Carter. She adjusted the microphone, scanning the crowd before speaking. I know many of you are wondering why I'm here today, she began, her voice calm but firm. For years, Everton Corp has been seen as a leader in the financial world, a company that thrives on innovation and progress. She let the words settle before continuing. But recently, we learned that progress isn't just about financial growth. It's about the people who make it possible. A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the audience. Sophia exhaled, her gaze steady. I came here a few weeks ago as just another applicant. Someone with the skills, the qualifications, the experience. But I was turned away, not because I lacked ability, but because someone decided that I didn't fit. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. That's not just my story. It's the story of countless others. People who were dismissed before they even had a chance to prove themselves. She scanned the crowd, making sure to meet as many eyes as possible. Let me be clear, talent doesn't have a face. Success isn't reserved for a select few. Opportunity should be given to those who earn it, not those who fit a mold. A murmur of agreement spread across the room. She took a deep breath, then continued. I stand here today not just as an employee, not just as a leader, but as proof that change is possible. Everton Corp will no longer be a place where bias dictates success. From now on, we will build a culture that values ability over background, performance over privilege. There was a shift in the room, a sense of awakening, of understanding. This is not just about me, Sophia concluded. This is about all of us. Because a company's true strength isn't in its name, its profits, or its legacy. It's in its people. And every single one of you deserves to be here, not because of who you are, but because of what you can do. The room was silent for a beat. Then, applause erupted, spreading like wildfire. Sophia stepped back from the podium, knowing that today was more than just a speech. Today was the start of something new. As the applause settled, Richard Everton stood from his seat at the front of the hall. For decades, he had been the face of Everton Corp, the man behind its success, its growth, and now, its reckoning. He stepped up to the podium, adjusting his suit jacket, then looked out at the crowd. I built this company with a vision of excellence, he began, his voice steady. A place where talent, innovation, and dedication drive success. But as we've all seen, somewhere along the way, we let something else seep into our culture, something that does not belong here. He let the silence stretch before continuing. For years, we have prided ourselves on being the best. But what good is being the best if we shut out the very people who could make us even better? The weight of his words hung in the air. I made a mistake, Richard admitted, his voice softer now. I assumed that because my name was on this building, the company reflected my values. But I see now that leadership is not about assuming, it's about ensuring. And I failed to ensure that Everton Corp was the company I always believed it to be. He exhaled, scanning the room. That changes today. Murmurs spread across the audience. Effective immediately, Everton Corp will undergo a complete review of our hiring, promotion, and leadership evaluation processes, Richard declared. We will implement transparent, measurable standards to ensure that decisions are made on ability, merit, and performance, nothing else. A few employees exchanged glances, intrigued by the sudden shift. We will also be establishing a diversity and inclusion council to ensure that no one, no matter their background, race, or gender, is ever denied an opportunity they deserve. Sophia watched from the side of the stage, arms crossed, studying the man who had only recently discovered the truth about her. Richard turned toward her, then looked back at the employees. I have spent my career shaping this company's future, he said. But it took meeting Sophia Carter to realize that the future of Everton Corp is not in its legacy. Asterisk, asterisk, it's in its people. Asterisk, asterisk. Sophia felt a tightness in her chest, but she didn't look away. This is not just a promise, Richard concluded. This is a commitment to every single person in this company. Because Everton Corp will no longer be a place where a last name determines your worth. The crowd absorbed his words. Then, asterisk, asterisk, a standing ovation. Asterisk, asterisk. Richard stepped back, letting the sound wash over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just leading a company. He was changing it. The sun cast a warm glow over the city skyline as Sophia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office. Her office. She exhaled slowly, running her fingers along the polished desk. Just a few weeks ago, she had walked into this building as a job applicant, someone dismissed before she had a chance to prove herself. Now, she stood here not because of her last name, but because of her capabilities. The office was sleek, modern, and positioned among the top executive suites of Everton Corporation. But what mattered most wasn't the space, it was what it represented. A shift, a new era, a chance to make real change. Asterisk asterisk. She turned, glancing at the company badge sitting on her desk. It no longer said candidate. It no longer said rejected. It simply read, Sophia Carter, Director of Corporate Strategy. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Richard Everton standing in the doorway, a look of quiet approval on his face. Settling in? He asked. Sophia gave a small smile. Getting there. Richard nodded, stepping into the office. You've earned this, Sophia. Not because of who you are to me, but because of what you bring to this company. Sophia met his gaze. That's the only way I would have accepted it. A flicker of pride crossed his face before he gave a slight nod. Good. For a moment, the two stood there, the weight of the past still lingering, but no longer holding them back. Sophia turned back to the window, looking out at the city. This is just the beginning, she murmured. And for the first time, she wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table. She was shaping the future of it. The screen fades to black. Text appears. Asterisk, true success isn't given, it's earned. And real change begins when we refuse to let the past define us. Asterisk. The music swells as the final shot lingers. A woman who had once been denied an opportunity now standing in a place where she belonged. A new beginning. A new legacy.